Okay, welcome back then. It's late August 1862. We left off in early August, and I had suggested that I'd pass turn, and we'll pick up at the beginning of the next turn with our moves made. And in early August, you will recall that we had two armies that were trapped in Varna. They were set to evade combat and to move all the way back to Adrianople. That's pretty much it. That was our main move, and also to secure the ground around Cairo, which we have done. I can report that we have done it successfully. Now, we'll have a look at what's happened over the past 2 weeks, and then I think actually it's worth maybe having a bit of an appraisal of the strategic situation and looking at what options there are on the table. And I'll talk about why in a moment. So, over the past fortnight then, the two armies that were trapped in Varna, which I hasten to add is not a fortified town and is a very modestly sized town, which means if these forces are assaulted in Varna, they're basically destroyed. These forces essentially sallied from the fortress in an attempt to basically break through the Austrian ring that was thrown around Varna to move back to Rumelia and then Adrianople, and they were set to force march also. They engaged the Austrian forces that had ample support and astoundingly inflicted a defeat on them in the field, inflicting 52,000 casualties, taking 28,000 casualties, and also we took 1,600 prisoners and we destroyed one regiment into the bargain. But it doesn't look like the Austrian intention was to assault Varna. It looks like they were simply looking to bypass our forces, and they pressed remnants of the forces that were located in Varna down, and they are besieging Adrianople, but certainly not with enough forces to assault Adrianople and actually take that fortress. In the short term, this means that our attempt to kind of break out of Varna has resecured the terrain around the city. So the immediate emergency being trapped inside the town is now over. But why has only one of the forces left the town? There we go. So these two forces are now outside of Varna. They've broken out of the town. They're not in great shape, but they're in much better shape than they were. They have received some replacements. They're getting a little bit low on supplies because, of course, Austrian forces have now compromised our lines of communication. So that's really the principal action. The other engagement is in Egypt, around Cairo. There's two separate engagements, and what we're seeing for the first time is the appearance of an Egyptian leader, Suleiman Pasha. He's defeated in his opening engagement with Mehmed Ali Pasha. Although we sustain heavier losses, we do actually destroy 3 elements. These elements presumably being a partial strength. We inflict 2,400 casualties on what looks like a cavalry brigade, which is destroyed. That's the first engagement at Cairo. There's an additional follow-up engagement. We come off much better. It's still a victory, but we inflict 7,500 casualties, take 5,000. 7,000. We take 5,000 casualties ourselves. And the Egyptians are forced to vacate Cairo, and they're pushed back, and it looks like Suleiman Pasha, the Egyptian commander that has made an appearance, is now to the south of Cairo. But we've secured Cairo, Giza, and we have a line of communication going up to Alexandria. That's basically the state of play in a kind of tactical sense. Now, we have to face some cold tap of facts, I think. The immediate emergency seems to be over. We're going to be looking to push these two commands down to Adrianople, but we have to face some rather hard truths. We are not going to win this war on the basis of Austrian national morale. I've sort of come to realize that, and for a number of reasons. Now, this suggestion was put forward about this time last year, at the end of the summer '61, end of the campaigning season '61. The idea was we would settle into a kind of hedgehog position in Bulgaria, conduct judicious localized counter-offensives, which we kind of did, and ultimately on the back of that, our spring offensive was so overwhelmingly successful. Once again, we got caught so much up in the action, we countered or scotched really the Austrian counter-offensive at Plevna, which pushed down to Sofia, and we just inflicted staggering defeats on the Austrians in the field. For the most part, we win the engagements against the Austrians in pitched battles. A lot of that, however, is because we're not quite fighting a guerrilla war, but we're not fighting a completely conventional war. It's kind of something in between, which is to say, we, for the most part, are picking our battles. We're picking the battles where we have most force concentration, where the conditions are optimal, the terrain is really, really good, and for the most part, this is the reason why we're able to consistently defeat the Austrians in the field, but it's obviously not enough. It's simply not enough. The fact that despite these defeats, the Austrians are able to re-push and re-engage in such a tremendous effort suggests that, well, for one, in order to win this war militarily, we're just going to need a much bigger army. We're going to need a bigger boat. And we're not going to win it through national morale. Now, the idea, the premise of defeating the Austrians based on national morale had a fairly sound, had a sound basis to it, which is to say that at the beginning of the war, the Austrians were high on the back of a number of victories in the Italian peninsula, on kind of, redeeming themselves by completely bludgeoning Piedmont, Sardinia, and they had a national morale of about 120, 130, something like that. And within about a year and a half, we'd whittled that down to sort of mid-90s. They were below 100, and 100 is nominal national morale. It's normal national morale. If you're at peace for 10 years, nothing's really happening, national morale will average out at around 100. And if you are at peace and you have 75 national morale because you've just won a victory, but you won it touch and go, or maybe you've just experienced a defeat, national morale will gradually, not very quickly, but it will gradually, generally 1 point sort of per turn, not always, it's not in a mechanical way, but it will gradually gravitate up towards 100, okay? Now, on the basis of really significant victories in the field, we had whittled Austrian national morale away. Now, Austrian national morale had other pressures on it. One, it would lose 1 national morale per turn on the basis of war weariness, and also, its national morale would naturally decay if it's above 100. So there is additional pressure on Austrian national morale once it's above 100. Once it's below 100, other factors come into play. One of those factors, I'm fond of saying scripted events when they're not really scripted events, but you have certain kinds of events. I don't know what it's subject to, but the event is basically, it's not a scripted event. I don't think it's completely randomized. It might be randomized in terms of its timing, but you have a kind of rallying to the cause effect, which on the basis of that, you can get 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 national morale points in a turn, and you don't do anything. You just get it. It might be subject to different things. It might be, for example, a function of your monarch's, maybe his military or his imperialism skill or his administration skill. It might not be. I say monarch, maybe your administration's into a faction you're playing. It might not be. It might just well be a function of, for example, average national satisfaction. Now, ours sits at 95. National satisfaction is based on really demands, consumer demands that are met in your economy. And that also comes under pressure from, for example, from militantism. As your militantism gradually increases, ours is sitting at 61 at the moment, that begins to eat into your population satisfaction. So at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you get quite a bit of population satisfaction in some ways because all of a sudden you have a huge amount of commodities flooding the domestic market. But gradually your militantism increases, and there are different mechanisms that you have to control that. We've just played a couple of hours. 2 of those mechanisms is basically sending troops, secret police, because we're a kind of an absolutist monarch, implementing temporary martial law, also investments in education. That depresses militantism. It keeps your population satisfaction high. Now, high population satisfaction might be the basis, for example, to a rallying to the flag event. So from late July to early August, we inflicted staggering defeats on the Austrians in the field. A number of staggering defeats, okay? And their national morale increased from like 91 to 92. That could only have been on the basis of an event like that. So there's that problem. It may be that the Austrians have fairly high population satisfaction or whatever factor, whatever variable built into the game actually. And I don't want to know. I don't want someone to read code and tell me. I'd rather I didn't know. I'd rather the game was enchanted, frankly. Maybe it's in the rules and I just I've read it and forgotten it, or it passed me by. But yeah, whatever it is that determines this, it means that it's going to be much harder for us to get from 100 to 75, to push them from 100 to 75, because there are various things that enable them to recover national morale. One is that. The other thing is that, well, in last turn, Austrian national morale was at 92, something like that. It's now at 97. They haven't captured anything. They haven't defeated us in the field. They already had Belgrade. Belgrade probably gave them 10 national morale at some point in the last year. They implemented a number of measures, and those measures are instituted a new military medal. Okay, which we don't have the facility to do that yet. Even if we ever do, I think it might be something maybe the AI only does. I'm not sure. The other thing was, again, they've decreed partial mobilization, so they've levied a new layer of conscripts into their army, which means that I'm not sure if that forms into units or whether that means that all of a sudden they get a huge number of replacements. This might be the means by which the AI generates replacements, but it probably also gives them a national morale boost. These are the only things that could have given them national morale that I can see. That means that if Austria has some kind of instrument whereby it can bolster and recover national morale, we're just not going to win a war. Not a defensive war, I don't think. And we've been doing it for the last year, and we've repeatedly inflicted some of the biggest defeats that we've inflicted on the Austrians we've done in the last 12 months. And they have more national morale now than they did this time last year. So we're not going to win a defensive war against Austria by continuously defeating them in the field. And that then leaves us at a fork in the road. And there's a few options. The most passive option is we go for broke now and we try and offer them a sacrificial pawn. We offer them Bosnia-Herzegovina. Now, our kind of defensive war has shown the limits of what we can do militarily. We have not been able to push up back into Bosnia-Herzegovina. We're also not been able to retake Constanta. Every time we've tried to push this position, we've ended up being in a really vulnerable, very, very dicey situation. So we can see that there are limits. The limits really is that we have forced concentration in Bulgaria, which we currently don't have. We're currently in a very precarious situation, and we conduct localized judicious counter-offensives, okay? But the limitations are we can't spare forces to break off and conduct really, really protracted independent campaigns into a different area like Bosnia. So we could offer, the most passive thing is we offer Bosnia-Herzegovina. We can either offer on a plate as an Austrian territory, they have a claim on it, or we can offer to make it independent. That changes things a little bit. You know, it means that it's likely Austria will go to war with it and absorb it at some point. But that's the other thing that we can do. That's the most passive option. And we tell ourselves that, you know, in the last analysis, we're at the helm of an empire that in real life at this time is in a deep state of decline, deep state of decay. And the odds on it ever doing as well as we have against an Austria, not just an Austria, but an Austria utterly animated and fully geared towards a war, which it wasn't before, it is this time round. The odds on us doing as well as we did were always very, very long, and the odds on victory were perhaps, you know, diminishingly long. So we can reason that to ourselves as we go home and explain that to our wives as she looks through us. That could be our story for this war, that it was a it was a defeat, it was a moral victory. We take it on the chin, and we move on. And at the very least, we remove Austria having a casus belli against us because they don't have any other claims, as far as I'm aware, on our territory. They have a claim on Bosnia-Herzegovina, basically. And we just accept that Austria is the dominant northern Balkan power in the last analysis. There's options later. Maybe Austria gets itself in a really dangerous situation, overplays its hand somewhere else. We look to invade. We look to inflict some kind of damage, something like this. I don't know. So that's the most passive option. The second, slightly less passive option is that we work them towards a white peace. And we do that by building up. I mean, we're in the process of building a sixth army. We have to bear in mind that the only army that we've managed to create, which is in the European theatre, is to replace an army that we lost entirely. So our army isn't really any larger than it was at the beginning of the war. And we have to keep in mind also that we haven't completely played this war with one arm tied behind our back, but we have played it very conservatively with regard to our resources. The reason for that is because the Ottoman economy early on is very fragile. It's far less fragile than it was in 1850, 10 years ago. We have a much more robust industrial economy now, but I wanted to, you know, knowing that we were always behind and we were always playing catch up, I wanted to ensure that it was always the case that we had a good, we had good kind of like a good domestic market, good national market sales. We had a good amount of private revenue coming in, and we were investing money and resources into big infrastructure projects, which we've been doing in the midst of a really, really tough war. It might be the case that now we're going to have to look at a war that is going to damage our economy short term. It's going to put pressure on private capital because we're going to stop exporting certain kinds of things like manufactured goods. We might even look to access, for example, our Ministry of Industry and Commerce, and we might look to reduce the amount of manufactured goods that are available on the domestic market. We currently have it maxed out. We might look to sort of reduce the amount of manufactured goods to create a greater abundance of manufactured goods. But the truth is, manufactured goods is not really our bottleneck. Neither is state revenue at this point. It's educated men, it's officers. We don't even have a really bad manpower. Actually, that's the main problem. But we can start. We've got a decent amount of state revenue that we've built up. We do have good private capital returns every fortnight. But we could start looking at kind of cost-effective. And by cost, I mean a way that doesn't use a lot of officers, a lot of educated men, a way of kind of cheaply building up a larger army. And now we're in the process of building the sixth army, and Of course, one force that we did manage to create is Mehmed Ali's force. Now, this army, it's not quite a full-strength army. At full strength, it's about 60,000 men. A full-strength traditional army, which is the, if you like, army 1 to 6, the kind of, the 6th army being constructed, the 5 armies that we have in Europe, they're about 80 to 90,000 men typically. So these armies, what I'm saying is that this force, we could look to secure peace with Egypt. We can do now, and we can pretty much get the terms that we want. Okay, but we keep Mehmed Ali Pasha's force as a permanent force in its current configuration. We get this to the European theatre. Furthermore, this provides us with a recipe to building new armies that is fairly cost effective, which is to say that we begin to utilize these volunteer forces that we've kind of accumulated in different fortresses in Sofia and Adrianople. We don't really need them in Adrianople. Adrianople is a really large modern fortress that generates a really large garrison, okay? But we could use this configuration. We use an army corps of volunteers that we've collected from prisoners of war, 2 infantry divisions, a cavalry division, a couple of independent artillery brigades. We can't, for the time being, build any more of these specialized units. There is a cap on this. You could remove it in the options. It's something I choose not to do because I want to play the game in a way that's fairly realistic. There are natural limitations in terms of how many doctors you can have in your army, because you draw this from your population. This gradually increases over time, by the way. So soon enough, we'll have access to these units, some more of these units. But military police, engineers, at this time, they would be drawn from people that probably had this kind of background in civilian life, and it's limited. It's the same with pioneers or labourers. Probably a lot of them might have been prisoners. Civilian prisoners, not prisoners of war. So we can't recruit any more of these specialist units, but that's okay. That's not a necessary thing to have a field army. These kind of, if you like, light field armies, this will be the 7th Army. Mehmed Ali Pasha's force will be the 7th Army. These reduced armies, these kind of ad hoc armies, if you like, that are built around volunteer detachments, they won't really be able to function independently very well, but they will be used to bolster our forces in the European theatre and to quickly be able to field more forces in an offensive capacity. And I think that's something that we can do. And to form these armies, all we really need to do is to build a couple of, 3 divisions, 2 infantry division, 1 cavalry division, and 2 artillery regiments, or something that, something approximating that, and a couple of supply detachments. And that's all we need to do to field one of those armies. That's something that we could do probably between now, late August. Once we get the 6th Army fielded, the 6th Army has 1 corps, which is complete. This is a traditional full-sized, full-blooded army, if you like, the 6th Army, but it will be the last one of its kind. We have 1 corps in Smyrna, 1 being constructed, and these are regular corps in Ankara. We are a hair's breadth away from having enough officers to begin the construction of a 3rd corps, which will be a conscript corps, if you like, or a militia corps, for which we need 21 officers. We're at 18, and we have an income of 5 per turn now. And then we'll be looking at a cavalry division, some artillery, and some. We can't attach any support forces to that. So that'll be the 6th Army, and that'll be given to Abdul Karim Nadir. Now, I should point out that the actions around Varna resulted in Abdul Karim Nadir. He was wounded. He is convalescing at the moment in Sofia. Okay, so just to point that out. So this is an option for a way of expanding our army in a way that doesn't sort of absorb lots of officers. It's something that we can do. Probably between now and, say, March, April time, we can get the 6th Army fielded. We can secure peace in Egypt and get the 7th Army, Mehmed Ali's force, back to Europe. And we could probably construct another force using the same template as the Mehmed Ali's force. These 3 forces combined, that's, say, 2 armies of 60,000 each, plus an army of about 80, 90,000. That's 200,000 men, straight off the bat, that are not involved in the European theatre, that will be introduced in the European theatre between now and March 63. That is eminently doable. And that's a bit of a game changer. That does change the balance a little bit. That opens up more options in terms of detaching forces, for example, to open up operations in the West. But here's the other... So basically, we could look to do that as the basis for trying to grind them down towards a white peace. Obviously, it involves nudging them out of some of these European theatres, sort of European tiles, if you like, districts. The other thing is we do all of the above. We do all of what I just mentioned in terms of expanding our army, but we look to a more protracted war, and we continue to look towards securing a more favourable peace. Now, there is a way that we can do this. One thing that we have a decent amount of is state revenue, and we have a decent income of manufactured goods. And I have stopped exporting manufactured goods, and I might even look to reduce the amount that's available in the domestic market for sales. Okay, we expand our transport fleet fairly dramatically between now and April. Okay, we get Mehmed Ali's force back. Let's call them, for ease, Mehmed's Marauders. There we go. All of these kind of like ad hoc forces, we'll give them a kind of colloquial name so that it's easier to remember them. The other forces will be numbered, Army 1 to 6. Okay, the first army will be Omar Pasha, second army Hussein Avni Pasha, third army Abdi Pasha, fourth army Ahmed Pasha, fifth army, where is the fifth army? Fifth army Ritza Pasha, right. Sixth army Abdul Karim Nadir. And so they're basically numbered. They're the traditional field commands, and then we're going to look to construct. Well, we've got one. We're going to look to construct an additional ad hoc field command. Now, one thing that we could do, in addition to building our army up, is expand our fleet. Expanding a fleet doesn't take a lot of officers. It takes a lot of things like state revenue, manufactured goods, things like that. I mean, we could probably double the size of our navy in the next year. It'd be pointless doing that, really. We are going to look to expand our navy a little bit, but a mass shipbuilding program is just it's not going to go down well in London or Paris. It has no real utility here, but we do want to begin to beef up our presence in the Mediterranean and deal with commerce raiding. But this is a bit of a plan that I have. First of all, in the short term, we try and restore equilibrium in Bulgaria, which we've done before. You know, we get our forces back to Adrianople. We deal a serious defeat on the Austrian forces there that look like they're under strength. They're mixed, and we re-secure a kind of a Bulgarian hedgehog. We send Omar Pasha, probably do this in the next fortnight, hurtling south, smash into the Austrians besieging Salonika, and deal out some real hurt and consternation to that force. Maybe even conduct a campaign on the west bank of the Vardar and clear the west bank of the Vardar of Austrian forces up to Niš. We know that Omar Pasha is definitely up to that task, okay? We've seen it done before. These are not massive Austrian forces. It's not going to be easy, but it's something that is doable. Now, so in the short term, we look to kind of like, restore a semblance of normality in Bulgaria. Maybe even again look to conduct judicious counteroffensives. There's a large Austrian force kind of in Plevna. Maybe look to conduct a counteroffensive into Plevna. But in the short term, restore the equilibrium, get out of the emergency, re-secure our lines of communication, and begin to get some force concentration. We keep doing what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years, okay? But in the background, we begin preparing a plan. And that plan is, we're going to expand our transport fleet significantly, using everything that we can, lay down as many transport ships as we can. Simultaneously, we bring Mehmed's Marauders back, we construct an additional force on that template. That's going to be a force of about 100,000 men, 100 to 120,000 men. We want a lift capacity that will lift at least half of that, ideally 2/3 of it, ideally all of it, okay? Next year, whilst we're doing what we're doing, we conduct a landing on the Dalmatian coast. It has to be a landing in force. We can't land this force in penny packets because they will get destroyed very, very quickly. We need to land a force that can absolutely take care of itself once it's countered. So it has to be something to the tune of 50 to 100,000 men. Now, Split is a victory location. The Austrians consider this an important part of their metropole. It's a significant coastal city, and we can secure a beachhead at Split or Spalato. That puts us in a good position also to regain Sarajevo, or even to conduct a thunder run north towards Vienna. That's the riskier move, but we could kind of fall off that bridge when we come to it. The main thing is, if we hold an ulcer on the Dalmatian coast, first of all, that changes the points balance. That means that we can start dictating terms. If we hold that and they're not holding Salonika or Sofia, the ball's in our court kind of thing, especially if we retake Sarajevo. That hits Austrian national morale, okay, but that's a peripheral thing now. We're not making that the main basis for our plan, for our strategic plan. Now, that instantly, of course, will cause Austrian forces to peel forces off the main theatre of operations. And again, we have to be in a position to be able to hold this. We could also look actually to turn Split or Spalato into a fortress the second we hold it, the first turn, and then we could even begin to shuttle some of these volunteer forces into the fortress to begin to bolster our position. That gives us a really good defensive edge. But yeah, it has to be an amphibious landing that can hold its own in the first month of it being there. Doesn't necessarily have to do anything dramatic unless we do consider the Thunder Run North as a serious option. That's a really dangerous move. and it might not come off. But if it does, it would be sensational. But at the very least, I think in order to do it, we have to secure Bosnia-Herzegovina anyway. We have a fortress at Split, a fortress at Bosnia, and maybe we even continuously reinforce this position with a more regular field command and conduct a thunder run. I don't know. But that's what I'm thinking. That's really the plan for how we look to militarily defeat Austria, is to try and open up a new front, which sounds counterintuitive because we're the one with limited forces, but we're looking to basically continue doing what we're doing in Bulgaria with limited forces. Forget Constanta, forget Bucharest, forget trying to push across the Danube, but, continue to create the impression that we're going to try and do that. We continue trying to lift the siege at Plevna. We try and keep sort of Salonika free and this kind of thing. That's my thinking. It will mean that we'll have to begin to really start ploughing resources. To that end, I already have taken some measures. So last turn, one of the things that I have done is I've passed a couple of government measures. That is to install temporary martial law, also send troops to suppress local unrest. The point of this is that we're going to have probably some less commodities available in the domestic market. We want to start eating into militancy. The other thing we're going to look to do as well is probably pass an improved education system. The main purpose of this is quite expensive. It's 500 state revenue. The main purpose of this is to suppress kind of militancy. But also, really, it's a kind of an offshoot. It's a secondary thing. It will improve literacy, which might look at also improving our situation with officers. So anyway, they're the three plans that we've got. Kind of answers on a postcard. I'm going to pass turn because in the short term anyway, we need to actually kind of recover the kind of tactical situation. So we're going to get Hussein Avni then set to an offensive posture. We're going to into forced march, and we want to get his force down to Adrianople. Quick time. So if the forced march comes off, it's set to what, 70%? He'll be there in 4 days. We want to get him out of Varna, frankly, before any Austrian troops get into Varna. We want to do exactly the same with Ahmed Pasha. And yeah, it's going to take him 6 days. Again, that's if the force march. He's only got a 55% chance. But we want to secure the ground around Adrianople, reopen our lines of communication. This invites Austrian forces down to Varna, ultimately in Rumelia. But a counterattack into Rumelia is supported from both Sofia and Adrianople. But we need to re-secure the ground around Adrianople. In terms of what's going on in Sofia then, Abdulkarim Nadir. Now we had conflict in the 5th Army between who was in command of that army. Was it Ahmed Pasha, Abdulkarim Nadir? They seem to be involved in some kind of perpetual pecking order stuff. That situation's resolved. Abdulkarim, that force goes to Ahmed Pasha. When Abdulkarim Nadir has convalesced, we're going to try and get him back into either Ankara, maybe just Constantinople, and we're going to begin to construct the 6th Army around him. And a lot of the flesh of that army is already kind of like been created, really. So he's going to stay there for the time being. Now we've got Omar Pasha and Abdi Pasha, both sitting in Sofia. Abdi Pasha is in good shape. Let's get him outside the fortress. We'll get him to now no longer avoid combat. We'll get him to hold at all costs. Now both he and Rita Pasha have the support of the fairly substantial garrison, that is to say these volunteer forces inside Sofia in the event that they are attacked. So we get them to hold at all costs. Rita Pasha's force sustained some losses. It looks like he was functioning in a supporting role in the attempt to sally out of Varna. He took some losses from that. We keep it. He doesn't need the elements replaced. We're going to keep him outside the fortress and just keep him doing what he's doing, really. Again, hold at all costs, along with Abdi Pasha. One thing we are going to do with Omar Pasha is let's get him outside the fortress. Now, the one problem with Omar Pasha is that his cavalry, one of his cavalry divisions, is at partial strength. It requires elements to be replaced entirely. We're going to deposit that into... there we go. We're going to deposit that force inside... Where is it? Here it is. Inside Sofia. And we're going to give him... Rita Pasha's cavalry division. He's activated. The other thing we're going to do... Now, one other thing that happened is 2 of our commanders, they were junior, they were kind of... I'm not sure if they were 2 or 3-star generals. It doesn't sort of really matter in this context, because neither of them were in command of a full army, but both Mehmed Rashid Pasha and Mehmed Vazif Pasha have both retired from service. The hope is that will result in new commanders being generated in Constantinople, possibly capable ones, we don't know. But whatever the weather, we've lost 2 commanders. They were subordinate commanders, and I think both of them were in Omar Pasha's force. We are going to give Omar Pasha, the only spare 2-star general, the Lieutenant General, Namik Pasha. We're going to deposit that into Omar Pasha's force. And we're going to give Namik Pasha command of the Imperial Guard. Omar Pasha is activated. Offensive posture. All-out attack. He is going to hurtle 12 days. That's depressingly long, isn't it? How long will it take him to force march? 80% chance. Let's see what other options there are. 8 days. 12 also. That's a double action. It's a lot to ask of him. But we're going to ask it of him, frankly. You know, he's going to be engaging in a battle. He might not make it to Salonika, but at the very least, he's going to secure. He's going to secure Skopje. Let's set him to an assault because there is an army corps inside Skopje. Let's see what forces they have. It's mixed brigades. He's going to assault Skopje, and then he's going to press on and engage the Austrian force besieging Salonika. It's a tall order, but it's kind of what we need of him, really. You know, we can't have him sitting on a tile for a fortnight and then moving again. We need him. He might not even make it to Salonika because it depends how long the action lasts at Skopje. But we're going to conduct a kind of an offensive really to clear the west bank of the Vardar, lift the siege at Salonika. If we could do that in 12 days, it'd be sensational. We don't want to kind of push him into such a position where he ends up sort of experiencing his first defeat. I can't believe one of his other cavalry divisions is also short an element. I did not realise that. Okay, well, let's deposit that to Abi Pasha's command. And that means we're going to have to also deposit that inside the fortress army. That division requires one more regiment of heavy cavalry, basically, so it's also short an element, by the looks of it. Okay, that's fine. So anyway, whatever the weather, Omar Pasha's at full strength, so let's do what we're going to do. 8 days. 12 days. It's ambitious, but it's what we need. Both of these commands hold back. They hold a defensive position. They hold defense at all costs, and they get the support of the volunteers inside Sofia, the kind of Hungarians and Ukrainians and Romanians and such that we have there, and the Poles. Same applies for kind of Adrianople. And in terms of the Egyptian situation, then it's going to be a really long video. It might be, so I might end up just doing one turn, maybe 2 turns, maybe next turn I'll make it really fast or something. In terms of Egypt, it's time to kind of make a peace deal, frankly. Let's have a look at wars. Egypt. Peace offer. Okay, so we've got a current war score of 39. It climbs by 2 or 3 points per turn because we hold Cairo. But we're going to take 90% of their wealth, so they're going to empty their coffers into our own. 20 years. Now, the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to force them to liberate Sudan. Okay? There's a bit of thinking behind this. That's one diplomat, we have 2. I think that's it. Let me just absolutely double check. Yeah, 90% of their percentage of their wealth. It's a very small amount. They have a very small economy. It's chicken feed, but we want it anyway. We will automatically get transit rights in Egypt because we are the victor. We can develop those transit rights into something much more kind of comprehensive once we have good relations with them. Once we are after the war. We're going to force them to create an independent sultanate. That is 30. What else could we get out of them? Demobilize 10% of their army. Oh, it doesn't really matter. With almost no wealth, it doesn't really matter. They won't they'll struggle to maintain it. Okay. 30 war score. Why isn't it sent? Why isn't it enough? Treaty available. Offer peace. Pay reparations. No, it's 90%, isn't it? You want. For 20 years. There we go. That, and then we can't get colony transfer. Yeah, and then liberate Sudan. Good. Okay, now the thinking behind them liberating Sudan, well, there's a few thoughts behind it. For one, the British are getting themselves established in Khartoum. You'll see that last turn I played a colonial merchant because we want to do exactly that. Khartoum might just be a doomed thing long term. It might just go to the British. We can see anyway that that large parts of northern Sudan are under the control of brigands and rebels. They're not even under control of the Egyptians. That suggests there's a bit of an appetite in the area anyway for some sort of independence. But we're going to look to try and establish ourselves in Khartoum, and Khartoum will function really as the kind of colonial capital for this region for what will become an independent sultanate. If Sudan becomes an independent sultanate and the British do achieve a dominant colonial position, the fact that it's independent from Egypt, which is a creation of this peace deal, might function as a breakwater for British involvement in Egyptian affairs. Maybe some scripted event doesn't fire or something like this, because they can't get colonially involved in Egypt because Egypt is a national entity, really, and not in the traditional sense. They can play certain kinds of things, like they can take control of their railroads and things like this, and their sort of their telegram service, their postal service, but they can't turn it into a formal colony, I don't think, anyway, not with the instrumentation that exists at the moment. But yeah, if the Sultan of Sudan becomes independent, again, it might function as some kind of breakwater for British involvement in Egyptian affairs. That's my hope. With transit rights, them emptying their exchequer into our own for the next 20 years, and with good relations on the back of that also. We get quite good relations because it constitutes kind of like an interaction between us. Once the war is over, we'll get a bit of a boost in relations. We can try and use that to establish a commerce agreement, more comprehensive transit rights that will essentially turn Egypt into a kind of protectorate of sorts. Not the same as like the Hajjaz, but a kind of protectorate. That's pretty much it then. Peace deal offered to Egypt. We'll hold a position in Cairo for the time being because it will take a bit of time for that to sort of happen. And we'll hold it hold at all costs. And yeah, we need to kind of hold Cairo for the time being. That is pretty much all we're going to do this turn. What we are going to do militarily is, let's talk about fleet. So we're going to begin the expansion of our transport fleet, which is something that's completely worthwhile anyway, even if we don't go ahead with the plan, because it does, it takes a bit of state revenue. It's manufactured goods, steel and coal. It takes a bit of time, but we're going to build a coal transport squadron. We're going to build it in Constantinople, and that's going to take a bit of our state revenue. Okay. Now, what we also did last term was we begun the construction of another merchant fleet. The reason being is we want to establish ourselves in, is it the La Plata? Yeah, La Plata Maritime Trade Box. Everyone else is kind of there. We're late to the party. The reason being is it's good access to coal. This region is becoming developed. Okay, the Argentinians and the Chileans, they're beginning to lay railroads and things like this. This is a resource-rich region, and it's definitely an area that we're going to start getting involved with, especially with good access to coal there and other kinds of things like timber and this sort of thing. So that the clippers, that sort of clipper squadron is going to be sent to La Plata. There's also something that uses private capital that doesn't use too much in the way of manufactured goods or steel. So that's the first thing we're going to do this turn. In terms of anything else, we need to really wait for. The priority is getting the 6th Army complete, okay? Which is Abdul Karim Nadir's force. He's going to be, when he's free, he'll be sent to kind of Constantinople, begin to assemble that. What we can actually do in the short term is let's use some railroad points. Let's get this core to Constantinople. 2 days. We'll get it to enter the structure. And that's good. And then we've got the 2nd core for that army being constructed at the moment. And then next turn, we'll begin the construction of the 3rd core. Then after that, it's a cavalry division. And then guns. We're going to again start a production line of kind of guns, probably in Sinop, and just continuously produce cannons that begin to pad our forces out. It's something that's worthwhile. First of all, let's get the flesh on the bones. Let's get the boots on the ground before we start looking at kind of sort of fabricating kind of other kinds of war material. That's pretty much it. That's all we're going to do for this turn. Let me just check. There's nothing that we can really do. We don't have the forces. In fact, what we're going to do is get Zaid from Mustafa Pasha. 12-day march. Let's get him set up in Taiz so that he's primed to lift the siege in Sana, the unending insurgency that is Yemen. I'm going to quickly check through the other reports, make sure that nothing else. Quite a long turn this, but then it requires, there's quite a lot to talk about, I think. I've been giving this quite a bit of thought today. And yeah, we need a new tack. We need a new way of approaching this war. So, good round economically. I don't think I took the measure of already setting kind of exports. So, turn away now. And let me do this. Sold a lot of cereals in the last turn. Okay, that's pretty much good. I can imagine to watch actually. This is painfully slow and boring, isn't it? It's kind of, I mean, it's different playing, I suppose, because I'm a bit of a sort of, I'm a sucker for micromanagement. Not in all games, but it's sort of, it makes you feel a bit more invested in the faction and this kind of thing, you know. But I can imagine this is, yeah, Dallas dishwater. So in future, occasionally I'll depict this, but for the most part, what I'll do now, when I pass turn, is I'll conduct kind of economic administration. Unless there's anything that's significant that's worth mentioning, I will mostly conduct it before I kind of unpause the video, so you don't have to watch me do the same thing every single time. Just going to really quickly check. So we're importing 20 units of coal from northern Germany, 10 units from East Mexico at the moment. That gives us, I mean, we can see that our consumption of coal has dramatically spiked because of our kind of development of railroads. Steel is set. I mean, we're outlaying some steel for the construction of transport ships. They are, incidentally, steam transports. You should keep that in mind. When they're moved, when they're used, they consume coal. That's good for manufactured goods. Timber is stable, as is preserved foods, and they are two of our main imports. Okay, that's good then. Let me very quickly check other reports. I probably will always recheck reports whilst you're watching, because it's something that's a worthwhile exercise, and it's also sort of kind of see some international events happening and this sort of thing. Speaking of which, let's quickly check the American Civil War. Okay, so nothing significant there. And yeah, the Confederacy, it's kind of game over for them, really, isn't it? They didn't do nearly as well as they did in real life, and I think probably within 6 months to a year, it's going to be over. I mean, Richmond's still holding out. I guess when Richmond falls, that's probably their last. Have they still got New Orleans? When Richmond and New Orleans fall, I think that's it, really, for them. Right, good stuff. That's pretty much it then. Got to put you on pause. Got to pass turn. It's late August, and we'll see you in early September. Okay, welcome back then. Early September, and the last turn has been as good as we could have hoped for in terms of sort of restoring some kind of normalcy to the situation in Bulgaria, consolidating the kind of rear, especially at Adrianople and Salonika. Number of fairly sort of decent engagements. So the first one then is at Plevna. Hussein Avni and Ahmed Pasha managed to slip out of Varna. Thankfully, my real fear was they'd be kind of caught on their heels with an Austrian force pressing down from Constanta. That didn't come to pass. The Austrians instead have reinforced the siege at Plevna. Now, we engaged the Austrian force besieging Adrianople, and I beg your pardon, this is the first engagement. This is an Austrian attempt, to storm Plevna. We get a national morale point for this, and this is on day 3, so there's a good chance they would have already reinforced the siege anyway. They're able to bring nearly 400,000 men against the garrison of 28,000, but it holds. Nearly a third of the force is destroyed, but we inflict 17, or just 18,000 casualties, just under, on the Austrian force led by von Benedek. That's good. We get a national morale for that, and that's a surprising outcome. You know, there's a really good chance that that fortress could have fallen in one fell swoop. That buys us a bit of time, and it scores us a free national morale point. Sana has fallen. You know, it is what it is. The saga continues. Zarif Mustafa Pasha is 1 day away from Taizz, and there he will have to kind of regather his organisation. Will fold the cavalry division into his command, wait till he's activated, and press back into Sana. Now, the big battle, of course, the first big battle takes place at Edirne, at Adrianople. We engage the Austrians besieging. There's only 53,000 men, a lot of regiments at partial strength. We pretty much destroy half the force, and we take, what, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... 3, 4, 5, yes, and we destroy 6 regiments into the bargain. So, pretty convincing victory, and we take 8,000 prisoners. The remnants of that force falls back into the Gallipoli Peninsula, trapped, presumably, and that force is for the taking now, I think. The other engagement, then, is at Salonika. Now, the plan was to conduct a campaign on the west bank of the Vardar. It looks like Serbian insurgents are besieging the Austrians at Skopje. So perhaps for that reason, Omar Pasha simply bypasses that situation. If he assaults Skopje, does that mean it falls to the Serbians? It's a can of worms. He pushes the Austrian forces out of Skopje. They fall back into Salonika with the force that's besieging Salonika. He engages them and inflicts a very convincing defeat indeed on the Austrian forces present there. Inflicts 24,000 casualties, and it takes 5,000 casualties of his own, and the Austrians fall back north into Petric. We will, of course, be looking to pursue the force north into Petric and pursue the Adrianople force, the remnants of it anyway, into the Gallipoli Peninsula with one of these commands. So the situation is being restored anyway, in terms of, I suppose, our defensive posture, our kind of Bulgarian hedgehog. We're conducting a localized counter-offensive, they're coming off well, and ultimately, once these two forces are dealt with, we'll be looking to get Hussein Avni, Ahmed Pasha back up into Rumelia, Omar Pasha back up into Sofia, and then with force concentration, we'll look to kind of nudge the Austrians out of Plevna. That's the next move, really. The peace deal has been sent to the Egyptians. They would have just received it. They will have a turn to consider the peace deal. The hope is they take it. Now, there has been a development in Egypt. We still hold Cairo, but the development is, the local population is revolting. In the areas that we control, so Dimyat, they're revolting in Alexandria. This multiplies Egyptian forces all of a sudden. This is the problem with a place like Egypt. The local population are obviously fairly fond of the local government. And the Egyptian government has successfully kind of galvanized the population. This is the problem with the idea of a permanent occupation of Egypt. Or even if we have a legitimate claim and we press it, it doesn't mean that if we controlled Suez, if the loyalty is still 100% towards the Egyptians, there's not a huge amount we can do to change that. There's limited measures that we can take to kind of change that. It means that there would just be territories that would be in permanent revolt. Unlike Yemen, it would be like Yemen on acid. It would be unending, and we would have really limited means to actually ever end it. I mean, Yemen, ultimately, there is an end in sight, which is full colonial status. I mean, once this war's over, we'll be looking at getting lots of smaller forces, cavalry brigades, marine brigades, and we'll have a main force, but we're looking to spread ourselves out and begin to really, properly suppress the population, really, frankly, in Yemen, and create the basis for really a long-term colonial project here, and it has to be done. We've got it to protect its status, but it's yet to really translate into much on the ground. It'd be really, there'll be no end in sight in Egypt. The best situation for us in Egypt, again, even if we change the options or we actually control some of the regions, it wouldn't mean very much. We just control a region it wouldn't be necessarily really wealthy, minerally wealthy or anything like that. I mean, pad out our. So, I mean, in Suez, we've got, cotton production, we've got nitrates in Qatar. I just think that it would be rather difficult. I think the best scenario is to leave it as is, secure a peace deal, turn them into a kind of protectorate, and even develop the economy, So we actually control the RGOs in some areas, cereals farm in Alexandria, things like that. Fishing port in Dumyat and this kind of thing, So we could kind of economically develop the region, periodically march in, reoccupy Cairo, and that'd be an easy thing for us to do, periodically, to basically maintain a kind of position where we compel them to empty their exchequer into our own, we economically develop the region, and we get the resources from that as well, So, so anyway, the peace deal's going out to the Egyptians. That's pretty much it. So, the kind of strategic quandary that I posed last turn then is the three options. do we just basically call it quits now with the Austrians, offer them Bosnia? They might not take it. In terms of the raw kind of like economics of it, Bosnia, even though, in a sentimental kind of way, we can say, well, Bosnia is fairly loyal to us and this kind of thing, and there's a bit of truth in that. It's good to have a part of the Balkan Peninsula where the population is quite loyal and quite fond of us, and that really is the case with Bosnia-Herzegovina. But Bosnia-Herzegovina is never going to pay for this war. In the entire length of the game, it's not going to pay for the cost of this war, as it is now. So sacrificing Bosnia-Herzegovina removes an Austrian casus belli, and sort of removes them possibly as an opponent of the north. They could still forge a casus belli against us, in order to maybe have other designs, maybe to look to kind of create an independent Bulgaria and this sort of thing. But yeah, that's the most passive plan. Do we offer them that? Do we keep fighting, keep building up a kind of reserve, look at different military options, maybe the Dalmatian coastline operation next year, and use that as the basis to push them to a white peace? We're not that far off trying to get into a white peace now. We could even continue what we're doing in the Balkan Peninsula, and on that basis, we might be able to establish a white peace. Or do we actually look to continue fighting the war, prosecute a prolonged war against the Austrians? We're 2.5 years into it, but look at maybe the Dalmatian operation and an expansion of the army as the basis for changing the kind of balance. Now, one thing that we can definitely say is that while national morale, the Austrians only lose 1 national morale point in the last turn. Okay, we gained 3 from battles, so I don't know if they lost some, but they managed to regain some from. I don't know, but obviously national morale is not going to be the basis. But Austrian combat power is, if you like, 2.85 larger than ours. Their armed forces is just under 3 times the size of ours. That's actually the lowest their combat power has been relative to ours in the entire duration of the war. They now have an army that is not much larger than Prussia's, and that's raw combat power that accounts for lots of things like garrisons. It's not subject to things like combat penalties, poor leadership, and so on and so forth. And a lot of their raw combat power comes from the fact that they probably have more advanced armaments than we do. So, and if that continues to decline relative to us, that will eventually become noticeable on the ground, much more noticeable on the ground. It may be that even though we're continuously astonished and shocked by the fact that the Austrians are able to conduct yet another offensive, it may be that they're nearing the end of their last gasp. And we can look at this as a kind of concrete evidence of that. Austria now has an army that is not much larger than France's. France has quite poor raw combat power. Might be that they're technologically lagging a little bit. It might just be that they have a fairly modestly sized army at this stage. But Austria, France, and Prussia are kind of back on a parity, really. So Austria's massive mobilization, it's now back to kind of almost where it was. It has a smaller army than Britain. Britain has a large, sprawling colonial army, of course, and the main army now is Russia. And that's the other thing. If we look at the long war option, all of that assumes that the geopolitical situation continues as it is. We can very well raise another 2 armies, but that means absolutely nothing if we have to deploy them to eastern Anatolia to fight the Russians. And Russia now has a really big army. Now, Russia is still tied up in a kind of unending conflict that's been raging for 6 or 7 years in Scandinavia. At some point, that is going to end, and it will end very suddenly, and we might be shocked all of a sudden and think, okay. And Russia all of a sudden has a huge army. It's secured a favourable peace deal in Sweden. It has a lot of prestige, and it might start fixing its eyes elsewhere. We should keep in mind that Russia is kind of terminally geared towards looking at us as a target. Russia has a claim on Constantinople. Okay? So if peace suddenly breaks out in Scandinavia, we're tied up in a war with Austria, Eastern Anatolia. It'd take them a long time possibly to move forces down to Eastern Anatolia, substantial forces. They don't have railroads. They have to march those forces pretty much, south of Tula or Smolensk or something. I mean, it's a long march, but nevertheless, within 6 months they'll have significant forces at their disposal. And we've periodically already seen that the Russians do have a full command, sort of in Bessarabia, kind of northern Bukovina region, sort of Odessa. So, yeah. Do we give them Bosnia? Do we go for it? Go for that now? Enjoy, I mean, if they had Bosnia, we would have spent the last 2-3 years at peace, or the last 2.5 years at peace. And maybe securing 5 to 10 years of peace would put us in a much better position to fight another war with them in the future. I don't know. Do we go for a white peace? Do we continue prosecuting the war? Answers on a postcard. I'm going to leave the video there. The Egyptians will be considering our peace deal, and we'll get our answer from them in late September. And yeah, I mean, I'll pick up where we left off. I'll pick up in early September. So, I mean, fairly predictably, we're going to be looking to kind of, roll up the Austrian forces that have been defeated, both in Adrianople and Salonika. So we'll be looking to move a force into Petric, obviously Pasha, and then probably get Hussein Avni down into Gallipoli. But yeah, any thoughts? I can't promise that I'll take your suggestion. I'm going to give it a bit of thought myself. Do we show a bit of resolve? Do we continue the fight, either looking for a white peace or looking for favourable peace terms? Do we continue with the project of maybe completely dismembering the Austrian Empire, holding Bosnia, but removing them as a threat? Now, we thought we did that last time, but it created the complete opposite of what we were looking for. It created a very hostile, very animated Austria that was geared towards a sort of long, protracted war. So yeah, answers on a postcard. Put your thoughts in the comments if you're watching the video and you have any thoughts on this. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.